She only wanted a warm meal, but what she gave him was a reason to live. A powerful CEO broken by fate, and a barefoot girl with nothing but hope. What happens when two shattered souls meet at the edge of survival? She changed his world with a leftover, but will the world let them stay together? Watch how a single act of kindness becomes a journey of healing, sacrifice, and love that will leave you speechless. Stay till the end, because the last scene will break your heart, and mend it too. The clinking of silver cutlery echoed softly through the grand, chandelier-lit dining hall. Polished floors gleamed like mirrors beneath leather shoes and velvet heels. Outside the wide glass windows, Manhattan pulsed with life. Inside, he sat still. The millionaire CEO, once known for commanding boardrooms, now sat in a wheelchair, alone at a private table. His tailored suit hung loose on his shoulders, his body thinner than it used to be. He had barely touched his meal, a filet mignon paired with truffle risotto and a glass of untouched wine. No assistants, no laughter, no business chatter, just silence and the low hum of conversations around him. His eyes drifted toward the untouched breadbasket, then down to his lifeless legs. The accident had stolen more than movement, it had stolen momentum, confidence, and the man he used to be. Suddenly a shadow fell across his table, not threatening, just small. He looked up, blinking, unsure if his weary mind was playing tricks again. Standing there was a little girl, no taller than his chair's armrest. Golden hair framed her face like a glowing halo, messy but bright. She wore a sharp pink frock under a faded denim jacket, one sneaker untied, the other scuffed. In her hand, a cloth doll with one button eye and a missing shoe. Her gaze was steady, too steady for a child, and she clutched the doll tighter. She didn't smile. She didn't giggle. She just said, "Trade with me." The words hit him like a slap wrapped in curiosity. He blinked, unsure if she was speaking to someone else. "I'm sorry?" he asked, raising an eyebrow, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Trade with me," she repeated calmly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He glanced around, expecting a parent nearby, a hidden camera maybe, but there was only her. "What do you mean trade?" he asked slowly, adjusting in his chair. She pointed at his plate. "If you give me your leftovers, I'll help you walk again." He stared at her, stunned, then gave a dry laugh that came out more like a scoff. "Little girl, that's not how life works," he muttered, turning his eyes back to the wine glass. "But it can," she said firmly, not budging. There was something oddly powerful in her presence, like she wasn't asking. She was negotiating. "Do you even know who I am?" he asked, trying to reassert control of the moment. She shrugged. "You're someone who wants to walk again, that's all I need to know." The directness disarmed him. He felt like a chess player whose opponent moved out of turn, and still won. He leaned forward, hands folded on the table. "So what's the trade exactly? I give you food and you—" "What?" "I help you," she replied. "Not with money or science, with care." He almost chuckled again but stopped. Something in her tone felt ancient, wise. "What kind of help can a little girl offer?" he asked, genuinely curious now. She held up a tiny notebook, edges frayed, pages colorful with drawings and childlike notes. "I've studied what heals the heart," she said. "Not just muscles, hearts." His throat tightened slightly, though he wasn't sure why. "And you think you can fix me?" he said quietly. She stepped closer, resting her doll on the table beside his plate. "I think broken things still work, when someone believes in them enough," she whispered. The restaurant noise seemed to fade, as if the world leaned in to hear her. He stared at the doll. One-eyed, dirty, but clearly loved. "You fixed that doll?" he asked, trying not to let emotion crack his voice. "She doesn't need fixing," the girl replied. "She just needs to be held." For a long moment, neither spoke. He looked at his untouched plate, suddenly aware of how much he wasted, in food, in life. His stomach twisted, not from hunger, but shame. "Why leftovers, hey boss?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "Because people only give what they don't want," she said. But even leftovers can heal someone. The honesty gutted him more than any investor's betrayal ever had. And you'll keep coming if I give you this? He said, gesturing toward the plate. She nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. I'll be back tomorrow. I've got more pages, she said. He didn't know whether to feel embarrassed, amused, or intrigued. But he did know one thing. For the first time in months, he wanted someone to come back. All right, he said, pushing the plate toward her. Trade accepted. She smiled, not wide but soft, like a promise being kept. Carefully she placed a tiny folded paper on his napkin. This is today's care task. You do it before lunch tomorrow. He opened it. Inside was a stick figure doing stretches and a crayon-written line. Try anyway, even if it hurts. He folded it back, heart suddenly thudding in his chest. What's your name? He asked. Call me Hope, she said, turning on her heel. As she walked away, he noticed a limp in her step. Not from pain, but from walking too far in shoes too small. He looked down at the doll she left behind. It wasn't forgotten. It was intentional. She was trading more than food. She was trading faith. That night, in his penthouse suite, he stared at the doll on his dresser. He didn't eat much again, but he did read the note 5 times. And in the dark, he whispered the word to himself, hope. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel entirely broken. The trade had begun, and neither of them knew it would change everything. The doll sat on the edge of the CEO's dresser like a guardian of something he didn't yet understand. Its one-button eye seemed to stare at him all night, challenging his logic, daring his emptiness. Morning light streamed through the tall penthouse windows, but he hadn't slept, not really. He wheeled himself to the dining table, ignoring the untouched breakfast laid out by his housekeeper. Instead, he picked up the crumpled care note and read it for the 6th time, tracing the crayon letters with his finger. He didn't know why it mattered, only that it did. Later that afternoon, he canceled all meetings without explanation. His assistant looked surprised. Should I reschedule the investor call, sir? He just nodded, eyes fixed on the city below, searching for a child. He returned to the same restaurant, early this time, claiming the same table near the window. Servers greeted him with nervous politeness, unsure of his sudden return. But he wasn't there for the steak or the silence. He was waiting. Every child that passed outside made his heart skip, until it wasn't her. Time dragged like cement through his veins. Then, just as the waiter placed down his water, she appeared. Same pink frock, same denim jacket, but this time she carried a thick spiral notebook hugged to her chest. No doll today, just purpose. She climbed up onto the opposite chair without waiting to be asked. You came back, he said, surprised by how much relief laced his voice. She nodded. You traded. That means I keep my part too. He leaned in slightly, trying to mask how much he'd hoped she would. What's in the notebook? He asked, eyeing the cover that was plastered with stickers, glitter, and a faded band-aid. My healing plan, she said matter-of-factly, opening it to the first page. There were drawings of legs, some shaky, some labeled in bubble letters, with notes like, stretch here gently, and drink more water today. He raised an eyebrow, trying not to smile. You a doctor now? Nope, she said proudly. But I'm good at noticing what grown-ups ignore. She flipped another page, a list titled, Things that might help even if they don't fix. He read it silently. Sunlight, breathing slowly, smiling for no reason, being held, talking to old trees. His throat tightened unexpectedly. Where did you learn all this? He asked, trying to sound casual. She looked up, blue eyes steady. From hurting and watching. He swallowed, suddenly feeling more exposed than he had in years. Her tiny finger pointed to a section labeled Daily, Hope Tasks. Today's task, she said, tapping the page, is to let someone listen to your silence. He stared at her, unsure what that even meant. She shrugged. Just don't talk. Let me be here. That's all. He let out a slow breath. No one had sat with him without expecting something. In forever. So he said nothing, just nodded. She pulled out a pen and began sketching something silently. Him, in the chair, next to her doll. As she sketched, his mind drifted. He saw the rain-slicked road, headlights swerving, the flash of metal and screams that didn't make sense until days later. He remembered the smell of gasoline, the taste of blood, and the weight of not being able to move his legs. Then, he remembered the hospital room, the sterile air, the pity in everyone's eyes. Even the therapists gave up before he did. He closed his eyes now, feeling the wheelchair beneath him like an iron cage. She tapped his hand gently, snapping him back. Was that the crash? She asked softly. He didn't ask how she knew, he just nodded. Did it take everything? She whispered. His jaw clenched. Almost. But not your voice, she said, or your kindness, or your dreams. He laughed bitterly. Dreams don't walk when you can't. She opened the journal again and turned to a page titled, Things Still Alive Inside You. It had doodles of stars, a heart with bandages, a light bulb with a smiley face. He felt the sting behind his eyes but refused to let tears win. You think this helps? He asked, gesturing at the messy but heartfelt pages. She nodded. It's not science. It's soul. He looked out the window, the city still roaring below, unaware of the quiet revolution at his table. You don't have to believe me, she said. You just have to not stop. He turned to her. Why me? Why this? She looked down at her notebook. Because you didn't throw away your food. That means part of you still hopes. He blinked slowly. It sounded ridiculous, but it didn't feel ridiculous. She stood up, placing the journal gently in front of him. It's yours now, but you have to add a page every day. He flipped through the drawings again, feeling something stir. Not quite belief, but not doubt either. What do I draw? He asked. Whatever makes you feel, she said, already walking toward the exit. He watched her go, sunlight catching the glitter on her jacket's back. She didn't look back, as if she knew he would. As he sat there alone again, he opened the journal to the last blank page. He picked up a pen the waiter left behind. He hesitated. Then drew a tiny pair of shoes. That night the doll was joined on the dresser by the notebook, and the man who hadn't written anything in years wrote his first page in whispers. The next morning, he sat at his table with a pen already in hand, notebook open to a fresh page. He didn't know what he'd draw, only that it mattered now. Outside the city pulsed on, but inside his penthouse, the silence felt a little less heavy. He sketched slowly, a small stick figure holding an umbrella under a crooked sun. There was no meaning to it, or maybe too much. He shut the notebook and exhaled, already checking the time. 12 minutes until she usually arrived. At the restaurant, he ordered extra bread and an herbal tea he never used to drink. She appeared, right on cue, with her journal slung under her arm and a band-aid on her chin. Skateboard crash, she said proudly, pointing to it like a badge of honor. You skate? He asked, stunned. I try. Falling's part of learning, she said, climbing into the chair opposite him. Without asking, he pushed a plate of untouched pasta toward her. She beamed like he'd handed her treasure. Trade accepted, she said. He watched as she carefully divided the food with her spoon, saving half in a foie. Il poche, for someone hungrier. Then came the assignment. Today's task was a breathing exercise drawn in stick figure form. It showed a man in a wheelchair with balloons rising around him, each labeled with a word. Let go. Trust. Still here. 5 minutes. In and out. Belly, not chest, she instructed. I'm not sure I breathe right, he admitted. You're not supposed to be perfect, she replied. You're supposed to show up. And somehow, that stuck with him more than any performance review ever had. He followed the exercise that night, sitting by his window, watching lights flicker across buildings like blinking stars. His fingers began to tingle, not from healing, from noticing. The next day, she brought a thermos filled with a bitter herbal tea. "It's awful," she warned, giggling, "but it helps wake things up inside." He sipped, grimaced, then drank more. "You really believe this stuff works?" he asked. She nodded. "Belief is like water. You don't see it working, but without it, everything dies." Day after day, the pattern continued. Leftovers for her, assignments for him. One day it was 5 stretches. The next, it was writing 3 things he still remembered loving. He wrote thunder during sleep, his mother's perfume, and the first time his legs carried him across a finish line. He hadn't thought about that in years. She read his list and nodded without commenting. She understood the weight between the words. At the office, his staff noticed he smiled more, softer, less like a mask. His assistant whispered to HR, "He actually asked how I was today." One board member rolled their eyes, probably losing it. His doctor scrolled through the reports. No major physical progress, must be emotional delusion. But he didn't care what they thought. She kept showing up, and he kept trading. Once, she gave him a jar of wild honey and told him to take 1 spoonful before thinking sad thoughts. "Sweetness reminds the brain that life is still good," she explained. He laughed but took it, and it worked, in ways he couldn't explain. She taught him to name the clue, shapes when he was stuck in a dark mood, to hum when his body hurt, as if sound could travel where medicine couldn't. He began to leave voice notes on his phone, just thoughts, not for anyone else. He listened to them and didn't recognize his own voice anymore. It sounded alive. She once made him write a letter to his legs, starting with, "I miss you." He wrote pages, tears soaking the ink halfway through. She never asked to read it. She just said, "I'm proud of you for saying it." One morning, he wheeled to the mirror and didn't flinch. His reflection still looked tired, but not defeated. Another day, she brought him a dried flower and said, "Even this used to bloom, and it still holds beauty." He placed it on his nightstand. It stayed there. His phone buzzed with business, meetings, stock alerts, media requests, but he silenced them. This was his meeting now. With a child who never asked for money, only effort. She gave him a new page every lunch, but sometimes she'd ask what he thought the task should be. He once said, "I want to feel useful again." She nodded. "Then today's task is to make someone laugh." He called his assistant and told a terrible joke. She cried laughing. He checked it off the list with more pride than his MBA. When she didn't show up one day, he panicked, called the restaurant, checked the street. Then he saw the note, left with the host. "I had a cold. You're strong enough to do it solo today. Don't break the chain." He smiled and did twice the exercises, just to prove her right. Her confidence in him rattled something even success never reached. At night, he read the journal before bed like scripture. He didn't know where this road led, but he knew he wasn't rolling down it alone anymore. And for the first time in years, he didn't dread tomorrow. Because the trade had become something else, something sacred. And somewhere between leftovers and laughter he had started believing too. Rain tapped against the restaurant window like a quiet warning from the sky. He sat in his usual corner, wheelchair steady, hands resting on his lap, waiting. But she didn't come. Minutes stretched like hours. His plate arrived, untouched. He stared at the seat where she usually sat, legs swinging, eyes shining. Something inside him felt empty. He rolled to the door, hesitant, unsure why his chest tightened. The sky wept heavily, like it knew something he didn't. And then, a small figure near the alley. Barefoot. Soaked. A denim jacket clung to her tiny frame, useless against the storm. She stood still, gripping something with trembling fingers. "Hey!" he called out, voice louder than he intended. She turned slowly. That smile, weak but still there, cut through the rain. She walked up to him, water dripping from her golden curls. "I made this," she whispered, holding out a damp paper. It was a chart, hand-drawn, crayons, hearts, stars. His name was at the top. Mr. Millionaire's Miracle Progress. Tiny boxes tracked the days, little notes like "smiled more" and "sat taller." He looked at her red, frozen toes. "Where are your shoes?" "They got wet yesterday," she said, brushing it off like it didn't matter. "Why didn't you stay home?" "I don't really have a home," she said softly, like it was just a fact. His heart slammed against his ribs. "What do you mean?" "I sleep at the shelter, but they close early sometimes, especially when it rains." The umbrella in his hand felt like a useless decoration now. "You're out here, for me?" She nodded. "A trade's a trade." He blinked hard, emotions crashing like the thunder overhead. Without another word, he rolled forward. "Come with me." Her brows lifted. "Where?" "My place, somewhere warm." "I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be, you already aren't." His driver opened the car door, eyes wide at the soaked child entering beside his boss. They rode in silence, her shivering gently, fingers still clutching the chart. When the elevator opened to his penthouse, she gasped. The marble floors, the tall windows, the glowing chandelier. "Wow," she breathed. "Do you live in a castle?" He smiled, genuinely. "Something like that." She tiptoed in, careful not to leave puddles. "Don't worry about the floor," he said. "It's just water." He handed her a towel, warm and soft. She wrapped herself in it like a blanket of safety. He brought her cocoa, steaming, sweet. Her hands trembled as she held the mug. "Thank you." He watched her sip, that pink frock clinging to her legs. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. "Mom went to heaven last year." Silence. "And Dad?" She hesitated. "I don't know. He left when I was little." His chest felt like it was caving in. "All this time, you've had no one?" She looked up. "Not no one. I have you now, right?" The air between them shifted. Warmth returned to the cold walls of his penthouse. She pulled a blanket over her knees. "You're the first person who listens to me, who takes my charts seriously." "You're the first person who's made me feel alive in years," he replied. The words came out before he could stop them. She smiled. "Then the trade is working." He laughed quietly. "I think you're cheating me." She tilted her head. "How?" "You're giving me more than I ever gave you." Her eyes softened. "Hope doesn't weigh much, but it can carry a lot." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating her face, young, innocent, unbreakable. "You should rest," he said, wheeling to the guest room. She followed him with quiet steps. He opened the door. Fresh sheets, soft pillows. "This is, for me?" "Yes. I usually sleep on a cot with 10 other girls. Not tonight." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "I won't mess it up, I promise." "I know you won't." She climbed in, pulling the covers to her chin. "Do you think people like me can make miracles?" He nodded. "You already have." She smiled and turned over. The weight of the world briefly lifted. He sat outside her door for a long while. Thinking. Feeling. Breaking quietly, and beginning to heal. For the first time in years. He wasn't alone. And neither was she. He sat in the silence of his penthouse, her tiny body curled up on the velvet couch, gently snoring in dry clothes and holding her soggy progress chart like a treasure map. Sleep softened her world, but his heart felt louder than ever. He couldn't sleep. Something inside him had cracked and kept echoing louder in the quiet of the room, like a melody he'd long forgotten. Morning light spilled in like a quiet guest, and when she woke up, she didn't ask for food, just smiled and whispered, "Ready for your miracle today?" He chuckled softly, the lines around his eyes folding differently now, not with sarcasm, but softness. As she skipped to his side, she pulled out a folded napkin with a stick drawing. A man standing up with fireworks all around. "That's you today," she said. He scoffed lightly but placed the napkin gently on the side table, as if it were more precious than any stock report he'd ever held. She pointed to his feet, and he obeyed, the silent commander of boardrooms now taking orders from an 8-year-old with belief bigger than the skyline. "Today," she said with a grin, "we try toe magic." He didn't expect anything, maybe a twitch of hope, but no more. She knelt beside his legs, whispered, "Come on, Mr. CEO, just think happy." And her tiny fingers wrapped gently around his foot like it was glass. He closed his eyes, bracing for the usual disappointment. But then, a flicker. Just the smallest movement, like a whisper of wind through a curtain. His toe moved. He gasped. She screamed. He blinked in disbelief. The world didn't explode, the earth didn't shake, but his soul did. She clapped her hands wildly like a child at a fair, jumping up and down, shouting, "You did it! You did it!" He looked down again, half in awe, half afraid he imagined it. But it was real. The physio, arriving minutes later, froze mid-step when she saw the footage he'd recorded. That's not possible," she muttered, jaw trembling. But the little girl just nodded proudly. "It's love science," she beamed. They called it a fluke, a spark, a coincidence. But to her, it was the start of a resurrection. Later that day she played soft music from her old cracked phone, and invited him to dance. He looked at her confused. "Dance? Don't need legs to feel joy," she shrugged. "Just need rhythm in your heart." And before he could resist, she stepped on his shoes, her tiny feet perched over his motionless ones, and held out her hands. "Let me lead," she whispered. So they swayed, slowly, gently, like a memory being made in real time. His arms, stiff with formality for years, now wrapped carefully around a child who believed in impossible things. She hummed softly, resting her cheek on his chest. "You smell like cinnamon and grumpy thoughts," she giggled. He laughed, really laughed, the kind that echoes down hallways and makes the air feel warmer. They danced in that small circle of sunlight on the living room floor, and for the first time since the crash, he didn't feel broken. He didn't feel weak. He didn't feel alone. She twirled under his arms, even though his arms barely moved, pretending he spun her like a prince. "You're getting stronger," she said. "Your soul's waking up." That night, he didn't reach for a scotch or a pill bottle. He reached for her napkin drawing and smiled. The next morning he asked for tea, her recipe, full of roots and hope. She handed him his next assignment, hand-colored with glitter gel pens. It read, "Try to smile when no one's watching." He did. And when she wasn't looking, he practiced twitching that toe again, over and over, just to be sure it wasn't a dream. She watched from the kitchen doorway and said nothing. But she grinned. They walked the halls of his penthouse that afternoon, her dragging his wheelchair and narrating fairy tales where he was the hero. "You're not a boss," she teased. "You're a magic knight with business armor." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that what I look like?" She nodded seriously. "Underneath all that rich and sadness, yeah." For lunch, he ordered extra, not because he was hungry, but because she loved naming dishes like they were characters. "This one's Sir Broccoli the Brave," she declared. They laughed so hard the neighbors upstairs knocked the ceiling. He didn't care. He looked at her, wild hair, socks that didn't match, gap-toothed grin, and thought, how does someone with nothing give me everything? She caught him staring and whispered, "You're not used to love, are you?" He looked away, throat tight. "No," he said. "But you're learning," she said, and kissed his hand. That evening, he called the shelter anonymously, donated a year's worth of food and blankets. He didn't tell her. He just wanted her safe, warm, always. And when she fell asleep with her doll in one arm and her progress chart in the other, he tucked a silk blanket over her and whispered, "Thank you for waking me up." She murmured in her sleep, "Keep dancing, Mr. Magic Knight." And outside, the city lights flickered. But in his heart, a brighter light had finally turned on. Not just movement, but meaning. The night settled quietly over the city, but inside his penthouse, silence was louder than ever. Not from absence, but from the weight of choice pressing on his chest. His phone buzzed relentlessly, executives demanding answers, emails marked urgent, flashing across the screen like warnings in a storm. He ignored them all. Instead, he watched her sleep peacefully on the couch, her tiny hand curled around her doll like it was her whole world. His world used to be spreadsheets and mergers, now it breathed in cotton blankets and small giggles. The next morning, the board meeting was brutal. Suits glared at him like he was a threat to their kingdom. "A homeless girl? In your home? Are you trying to tank this company's image?" One of them spat, veins popping in frustration. Another cleared his throat, voice cold. "You're becoming emotionally compromised. We suggest a leave of absence, or a full resignation." Their words hit harder than any accident ever had. He gripped the arms of his wheelchair so tightly his knuckles turned white, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Back home, she was drawing rainbows and labeling stick figures with their names. "This one's me," she said proudly, pointing at the little girl flying beside a man who stood. "And that's you. You're walking again." He swallowed hard. If only drawings were destiny. But wasn't her belief already working magic? Every inch he moved now was because she believed first. She handed him her new assignment, a tea blend, leg stretches, and a note that simply said, "Don't give up when you're almost flying." He rolled to the window and stared down at the city that once bowed to him. What good was an empire built on isolation? His reflection in the glass looked different now, softer eyes, shoulders not quite so heavy. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his publicist. "You have 24 hours to either issue a distancing statement or step down as CEO." He turned it off. He wheeled to her and asked, "What if I lose everything?" She looked up, tilted her head and whispered, "Then you'll still have me." That night he dreamed again. The same dream. He was walking, slowly at first, then stronger, each step echoing in a golden field. But then, she wasn't beside him. He called out for her, voice breaking, but all he heard was silence. He jolted awake, heart racing. She was still there, sleeping near his wheelchair, arms wrapped around her doll like armor against the world. He gently reached down and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're the only thing real," he whispered into the dark. The next day the board leaked stories to the press. False, rumors, ugly headlines. He was called unstable, reckless, a man with too much power and too little control. Photographers swarmed the restaurant where they used to meet. The warmth they shared was now the media's battlefield. She saw a photo of herself on a tabloid and asked, "Did I do something wrong?" He shook his head slowly, voice tight. "No, sweetheart, you're the only thing right." His lawyer brought him papers, a deal to protect his shares in exchange for silence. All he had to do was cut her off. "This is business," they said. "You can't save everyone." He stared at the contract for hours. Finally, he ripped it in half. "I'm not saving everyone. I'm just not losing her." The lawyer stormed out. He turned back to her drawing, where the CEO now had wings. "You really think I can fly?" he asked. She nodded. "But only if you don't let them clip you first." She noticed he was quieter that evening. "Are you scared?" she asked, fiddling with the corner of a napkin. He exhaled slowly. "Yes, because they can take everything from me." She leaned in close and whispered like it was a secret spell, "But they can't take me, unless you let them." That night he stared at the ceiling and made a decision. He wouldn't fight for the company, he would fight for the part of himself that had learned to feel again. At the next board meeting, he wheeled in wearing his best suit, not for them, but for her. She was outside in the waiting area, humming to her doll, unaware that grown men were planning his erasure. When the room demanded a final answer, he stood. Not fully, not strongly, but enough. His legs trembled, knees wobbling, and one hand clutched the table for balance. But he stood. Gasps filled the room. Cameras clicked, and through the glass door she saw him. Her eyes lit up and she mouthed, "You're flying." The vote never happened. The news wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about a miracle in motion. Doctors tried to explain, but nothing added up. All he said in interviews was, "She gave me leftovers, and I gave her belief. I think I got the better end of the trade. She climbed into his lap during one interview and whispered, "Told you so." He smiled, and for the first time, the world believed, too. The dream ended with a jolt, not of hope, but of pain. That morning the CEO collapsed mid-step, clutching his chest. The progress they had fought for now flickered like a candle in a storm. Machines beeped, nurses rushed, silence fell. He was rushed to the emergency room, unconscious. Doctors blamed his aggressive physio attempts. His body, once built for war rooms and power suits, had bent too far. She wasn't at the hospital that day, no tiny hands holding his, no scribbled drawings taped to his monitor, just sterile walls and cold fluorescent lights. The boardroom wolves heard. They whispered, "Told you so." They sent in a handler, someone to manage the fallout. He waved them away. He didn't want to talk numbers, he wanted to talk to her. But the bench where she always waited was empty. The bakery, where she once traded smiles for scraps, closed. He asked the shelter director. "She hasn't come in 3 days," the woman said softly. Something inside him shattered, deeper than any nerve. He sat by the fountain she once danced around. Hours passed. She never came. Guilt gnawed at him like a fire he couldn't put out. Did she think it was her fault? Had his fall shaken her childlike hope? Rain began to fall, soft at first, then pouring. He didn't move, he let it drench him. Because she had once stood in that same rain, smiling. Her belief had healed him more than doctors ever could. It wasn't about nerves or muscles. It was her laugh, her patience, her tiny victories shared. She hadn't just walked into his world, she had rebuilt it. But now she was gone, and it felt like watching the sun vanish from the sky. He hired private investigators, gave them only 3 words: find the girl. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. His home, once cold and clean, felt emptier than ever. The journal she gave him lay open on the table. On the last page, "Believe a little more today than you did yesterday." His fingers brushed the ink, gently. The drawings weren't just cures, they were cries for help. 2 days later, a call came. "She's in a hospital across town," the agent said. His heart stopped, then thundered. He went immediately, no suit, no guards, just him. She was in pediatrics, room 412. When he entered, he saw her curled up like a petal in winter. IV tubes, hollow cheeks, chapped lips. Still, her little hands clutched the same crumpled sketchbook. She didn't see him at first. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Why did you disappear?" he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy, scared. "I broke you," she said faintly. "No," he choked. "You fixed me." Tears slipped from his eyes, ones he'd never shed in boardrooms or bedrooms. "I walked because you believed. I stopped walking because you left." She blinked slowly. "But I thought I hurt you." "You saved me," he whispered, "and I didn't even know I needed saving." Her fingers reached for his, trembling, tiny. He held them gently. "The world told me to let go of you," he said. "But I couldn't. Because when you vanished I realized I'd rather lose my company than lose you." Her eyes widened, a tear slipping free. "You'd do that?" she asked, voice cracking. "In a heartbeat." She smiled weakly. "Then believe a little more." Again. He nodded, forehead against her hand. "I will. For you. For us." A nurse walked in, startled to see the powerful man crying beside the frail girl. But he didn't care about appearances anymore. He cared about her. She had given him everything. Hope, strength, love. And now it was his turn. His turn to fight not just for himself, but for her. He turned to the nurse. "Get her whatever she needs." The nurse stammered. "Sir, insurance." "Doesn't matter," he cut in. "I'm paying." The nurse nodded and left in awe. The girl's eyes drifted shut. He stayed by her side, gripping her fingers gently. And for the first time, he whispered a prayer. Not for success, not for recovery, but for her, the little girl who taught him how to live. The hospital room was dim, filled only with the soft hum of machines and the faint rustle of rain against the window pane, when he stepped inside with trembling fingers clutching a brown paper bag, his old symbol of denial now turned into something sacred. He crossed the sterile floor like a ghost from a forgotten world, suit wrinkled, tie askew, knees threatening to betray him, but his soul anchored by one purpose. Her. She lay small and pale beneath the white sheets, tubes snaking from her tiny arms, oxygen clinging to her like breath borrowed from fate. Her golden hair, once bouncing in the wind, now clung to her forehead in damp curls, but her eyes still held that impossible light, that flicker of stubborn, childlike wonder that once made a broken man believe in walking again. He sank to his knees, the paper bag trembling as he placed it beside her like an offering at an altar, and with a voice cracked by emotion, he whispered, "I brought leftovers. I'm ready to trade." Her lips parted, not for food, not for laughter, but for something sacred, eternal. And with a strength born not from her frail body, but from something much deeper, she slowly lifted her hand and placed it over his chest, over the thudding organ that had been locked in ice for years. "Then walk, to me," she whispered. And it wasn't a command, wasn't a challenge, but a plea, an invitation into life, into love, into redemption. The silence that followed stretched like eternity, broken only by the ragged inhale he took as he gripped the side of the bed, pulled one leg beneath him, and for the first time in years, summoned not his muscles but his memories, of her dancing fingers on his shoes, her voice like sunlight saying, "One step today, maybe two tomorrow." Sweat broke across his brow, his body screaming in resistance, but something louder was calling, the image of her standing alone in the rain, her smile paper-thin but powerful, the sound of her giggle echoing through his penthouse, the warmth of her belief filling a void that wealth never could. He rose slowly, inch by inch, gravity clawing at him, pain lancing through every nerve, but she watched him with eyes wide, not afraid, not doubtful, just utterly present, as if her whole being was willing him upward. And then he stood. Shaking, swaying, gripping the bedframe like it was life itself, he stood tall, not as a CEO, not as a patient, but as a man reborn, a man who had traded silence for words, walls for warmth, and fear for faith. Her eyes welled with tears, and she didn't speak. She just opened her arms slightly, barely, and in that sacred gesture lay everything: trust, forgiveness, joy, and a welcome home. He took one trembling step toward her, the floor tilting beneath him like a stormy sea, and another, until he collapsed into the chair beside her, breathless, broken open, alive. She reached for his hand and held it against her heart now, her tiny pulse fluttering beneath his palm, and in that moment, nothing else existed. No board meetings, no headlines, no legacies, just two people who had traded everything but gained more than they ever dreamed. A single tear slid down his cheek and landed on her blanket, and she caught it with a weak laugh. "Told you," she said, her voice barely a breath. "Belief can move legs. And hearts too." He didn't respond with words, just placed his forehead against hers, the bag of leftovers forgotten on the floor, because the real trade had already been made. Her hope for his healing, his steps for her smile. And as the rain kept falling outside, the man who once ruled empires silently wept for the little girl who had given him back the world, one impossible, glorious step at a time. He stood, trembling, uncertain but standing, his eyes locked onto hers as machines softly beeped in the background, bearing witness to a miracle neither science nor statistics could explain. The moment was sacred, silent, until her pale lips curled into the gentlest smile, her voice barely audible. "I knew you could." Tears welled in his eyes, not from pain, not even from pride, but from the overwhelming weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. She was just a child, but her faith had moved mountains that even billion-dollar medicine couldn't touch. That night he didn't return to his luxury penthouse or his board meetings or his glass towers. He slept beside her in the stiff hospital chair, holding her fragile hand like it was life's most sacred treasure. When she drifted into sleep, he sat watching her, his mind racing with what truly mattered, and none of it was on a spreadsheet. By dawn, something inside him had shifted, not a flicker but a blaze of purpose rising from the ashes of his old self. He left the hospital with a plan, not for another business acquisition, but for something the world didn't even know it needed. He bought a building, not downtown, not fancy, but warm, sunlit and safe, with big windows and a wide-open yard full of overgrown grass. His staff was confused, his legal team warned him, but he didn't care. He was building her dream now. A wellness center, not for profit, but for children who lived in shelters, who smiled through pain, who had more wisdom in their tiny hearts than some CEOs in corner offices. He called it the Trade House, where kids could trade fear for love, loneliness for laughter, and tears for healing. She was still recovering, still frail, but when he wheeled her into the courtyard of the center, her gasp said more than words ever could. Wide-eyed kids peeked from corners, unsure if this place was real, if this kindness had a catch. He knelt before them, not in suits or power, but as a man who knew what it felt like to be broken, and slowly, beautifully rebuilt. She sat beside him, a soft blanket over her lap, her staff badge pinned proudly. Founder's partner. The words weren't just ceremonial, they were a promise, a declaration, a legacy forged not in money, but in faith and tears. She now had her own office, tiny, pink, cluttered with crayon drawings and warm tea mugs, but it was hers. Each morning she welcomed the children one by one, not as patients, but as guests of her heart. He walked the halls beside her, not in dominance but in reverence, amazed at how far they'd both come. The man who once couldn't move his legs now knelt to tie shoelaces of fatherless kids. The man who once couldn't smile now laughed freely at terrible knock-knock jokes during snack hour. And every evening, when the last child left and the lights dimmed, he and the girl would sit on the porch swing, sipping herbal tea and watching the stars. "What made you believe in me?" he asked one night, voice full of wonder. She looked up, blue eyes shimmering. "You looked lonely, but not empty, just waiting to be filled." That line stayed with him, not like a business quote, but like scripture tattooed on his soul. The wellness center expanded, not with buildings, but with hearts. Former street kids became volunteers, laughter echoed louder than sirens ever did. She insisted every wall be painted by the children. "It has to feel like theirs," she said, holding a dripping brush. And when a boy asked for a garden, because plants don't run away, they built one the next day. He funded every wish, not out of guilt or image, but because he finally understood that healing wasn't a charity, it was a right. Board members who once doubted him resigned quietly, replaced by dreamers, educators, and child psychologists. Shareholders protested at first, until they saw media headlines not about profit, but about lives changed, about a CEO with a conscience. Journalists swarmed, eager for scandal, but found instead a story too pure to tarnish, a man rebuilt by a child's grace. When a reporter asked why he risked everything, he smiled. "Because she traded me back my soul." The girl still carried her hand-drawn progress chart, now framed in the main hallway, under the plaque that read, "Believe a little more today than you did yesterday." Kids pointed to it daily, whispering like it was magic. One child asked her, "Do you think I could walk again too?" And she knelt down, smiling. "Do you believe it?" The empire he once built with concrete and profit was now rebuilt with crayons, laughter, courage, and tea. He had walked, to her, and now they walked for others. Every step he took was a step she had given him. Every life he touched was a ripple of her belief. She was no longer the strange little girl. She was a force. And he He was finally the man she saw behind the scars, the silence, and the chair. People asked if he missed his old life. He'd just chuckle, "This is my real life." He gave keynotes now not on mergers, but on mentorship, not on valuation, but on vulnerability. He quoted her like one quotes great philosophers, and when she caught him doing that, she'd roll her eyes playfully and say, "You're so dramatic." But deep down she knew, he meant every word. Years passed, but the center thrived. And though she still had health battles, she faced them like she always had, with grace, mischief, and unstoppable light. When donors came to visit, they'd ask who the founder was, and he'd proudly point, "Her. I'm just the guy she believed in." Every Christmas, they hung ornaments made from paper notes where kids wrote what they were thankful for. And every year hers simply read, "You." He kept that one in his wallet. The little girl who once brought leftover hope into his empty routine now led a generation into wholeness. And he, once powerful but hollow, was now gentle, full, and finally, alive. In trading pain for purpose, they healed an empire, and each other. He stood at the threshold of the same restaurant where fate had once Whitley rewritten his life, now not as a lost man in a chair but as a living miracle, upright, steady, changed. Outside, the rain trickled just like that first day, painting the sidewalk in shimmering gray. But this time, his heart was full of light, not weight. Inside, laughter danced off the walls, not from customers but from children, kids without homes, now with hope, eating warm meals from plates with their names printed in bright colors. The man once known only for deals and deadlines now wore a warm gray sweater, sleeves gently rolled up, humility stitched into every thread. She stood beside him. The girl, now healthy, her eyes a living reminder of courage, with her badge swinging gently against her chest. Founder's partner. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was thunder in silence, the proof of a miracle that lived and breathed and gave. He smiled at her before walking toward the entrance, drawn by a familiar quiet sob that echoed from a corner booth. A little girl, dirt-smudged cheeks, thin arms wrapped around herself, eyes hollow yet watching everything, sat alone with a plastic spoon and no bowl. Her shoes were too big, probably borrowed. Her coat was too thin, likely found. But her eyes, they were the same as the ones that saved him once, not by curing him, but by loving him when he was broken. He knelt slowly, his knee brushing the tiles with the ease of a man who now walked without pain, but remembered what it meant to crawl. In his hand, a bowl of warm soup, just like the one she had once given him with shaking fingers. The little girl flinched at first, used to being seen then shooed. But he didn't speak right away. He just set the bowl down carefully like it was treasure. Then, his voice, soft, steady, drenched in memory, broke the moment. "Let's trade." Her eyebrows lifted in confusion, the spoon falling from her hand and clinking on the floor. He pushed the bowl a little closer and added, "This soup, for your story." She didn't answer, but her fingers curled around the bowl like it was a lifeline. "I once made a trade," he whispered, still crouched low, "with a girl who had nothing, but gave me everything." His voice cracked at the edges, but he smiled through it, letting warmth win over grief. "She didn't ask me for money, just for effort, just for heart." The little girl, trembling, took her first sip, and her eyes watered, not from heat, but from unfamiliar kindness. "You don't have to talk now," he continued, "but you can stay as long as you want. This place, it was built for kids like you." Behind them, the walls were painted with murals, hand-drawn by children who once called alleys their homes. One of those drawings, near the ceiling, showed a man in a wheelchair holding hands with a little girl beside a golden sun. The girl beside him now, his partner, his heart's compass, approached and gently placed a warm blanket on the child's shoulders. "We don't rescue," she said gently to the girl. "We trade, we believe, and then, we grow." The man stood now, slowly, no rush, no pain, just purpose. He took out a folded note from his pocket, the same one the original little girl had once scribbled and left on his tray years ago. "Leftovers can change lives," it had said, "if shared with love." He passed it to the new girl. "She wrote this to me," he said, "and now, it's yours." Tears welled up in the child's eyes, and for a moment a smile, small and quivering, broke through the fear. From the corner the chef appeared and nodded silently, bringing over another tray, this time with cookies shaped like stars. The child reached out, not just for the cookie, but for hope. And as she did, she brushed her hand against his, warm, fragile, alive. He exhaled deeply, like he had been holding it in for years. "I'm not a CEO anymore," he told her. "I'm just someone who was saved by someone just like you." Her eyes, still wide, looked up at him with disbelief. He chuckled, wiping a tea. "Far away. Don't believe me? Ask her." He pointed at his partner. The girl nodded with a grin. "He used to be really grumpy. Now he dances in the kitchen." The child's lips parted in awe, followed by a little giggle. The first true sound she'd made all day. Other children peeked around corners, recognizing the new arrival. One of them whispered, "She'll stay. I can feel it." That night the restaurant glowed brighter than usual, not from lights, but from something unnameable, like healing. He stood at the counter, serving bowls, every motion sacred, every smile genuine. Once upon a time, this was where he was broken. Now, it was where others came to be whole. His staff didn't call him sir anymore, just Mr. G, short for grateful. And the girl beside him? She no longer clung to walls or slept in corners. She ran the calendar, painted hope, and taught others the trade of love. Before closing, he glanced once more toward the booth where the new little girl now slept peacefully on a makeshift pillow. He placed a soft toy beside her, a bear with a badge. "You matter." Turning to his partner, he whispered, "She reminds me of you." She nodded, eyes glistening. "She reminded me of you." They didn't need a ceremony or stage to know what they had become. Legends don't always start in battlefields, sometimes they begin with soup. He dimmed the lights and locked the door, whispering to himself, a giant was healed, not by power, but by love. And outside, under a soft drizzle, another child passed by, drawn by the scent of soup and the echo of something safe. The cycle had begun again, not by accident, but by choice. Because one little girl once gave everything she didn't have. And in return, a giant rose, not to conquer, but to lift others. The story didn't end. It began anew, with leftovers and love.